Hi, everyone. Welcome to Copenhagen Fashion Week Talks. My name is Aditi Meyer, and today we're going to be talking about theories of change in fashion. I'm joined by Alec Leach, Mica O, and Christopher Raeburn. So to start, can you each introduce yourselves with a brief title about you and your work?
Yeah, my name's Alec. I'm an author and strategist working in sustainability and consumerism.
My name is Mica O, and I work as an educator. I have an institution where I educate in intersectionality, and a business where I teach and educate in diversity culture and anti-racism and also intersectionality. Yeah.
Amazing.
My name's Christopher Raeburn. So I founded my own company back in 2009. I took one parachute and I made it into 8 garments, and I called the idea not made in England, but remade in England. And I've been really lucky over the last now 13 years, which is scary to say, to grow my own company, but also collaborate with others. And one of the longest term partnerships has been with Timberland, where I worked first as Global Creative Director and now collaborator at large. So yeah, very happy to be here.
Brilliant. Well, to start, I would love to learn about each of your origin stories. So what kind of catalyzed your work in this space as 3 folks that are all kind of reimagining fashion and the fashion industry in your own way? So Alec, you can start.
Yeah, so previously in another life, I was the style editor at High Snobiety, and as part of that job, I used to go to Fashion Week. Like every season, I would do the menswear circuit. So London, Pitti Uomo, Milan, Paris, plus maybe Korea or Japan, or did Russia, Ukraine a few times, Georgia. Tons and tons of travel, and by the end of it, I just got really exhausted with the newness. I'd be in like 6 days in Paris, I'd see maybe about 100 collections in 1 week, and it just got so overwhelming and so exhausting that I started to kind of question what it was all for. Especially once you start to come to terms with the environmental impact of all of these clothes that you're seeing, it starts to become kind of impossible to ignore. So that was kind of what, if there was a catalyst, I would say it was the Fashion Week circuit for me.
Makes a lot of sense. And how has your experience been in recent years in Copenhagen Fashion Week?
Yeah, I mean, I still love Fashion Week. It's still such an important event because you get everybody together, and we can do stuff like this, and everybody can meet new people. They can exchange ideas. They can, really, really connect with one another. So I still love Fashion Week. It's just the amount of newness is something that I think we really need to be a little more critical of.
100%. So kind of using Fashion Week as a platform for creativity rather than this fast-paced cycle.
Exactly.
And mindless consumption.
Exactly.
Mica, what about you?
Well, I come from different things. I come from the music industry and into the fashion industry. I'm also a scholar in Black literature. So in that, to what I do today is, I don't know how it's literally my way and my steps to what I do today, but my the reason, it's I was hired into the regular industry of fashion, and I was shocked. I was shocked of what I saw, and I did not just see underage models. I also saw very, very skinny, size 0 and under that size, if that's even possible, but it is. And I did not like that. So I started my own. I started my own production where I worked only and exclusive with full figure models, and also models over 18. Primarily black, brown models, also white models, but all the models and all the production that you don't see and not represented, I started to work with that. And then I almost gave up for a lot of reasons, but I think I will talk into that later. But then I came back, so now I'm here, and instead of just do in the production, I decided to do more into the industry with the experience that I have. So to take my scholar and my expertise in knowledge and literature, I took the production side and my experience to the education side. So now I educate in the industry that I really love, but we also need to make better and do better. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'm excited to jump into your story of what brought you back. Christopher, what about you? You have been in this world of upcycling for a while now, before it became so ubiquitous. So I would love to hear about your origin story.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, I sort of joke now with new designers coming through. I guess I'm like a dinosaur in this conversation, because the first remade jacket I did was at university. So actually now 20 years ago, and I studied first at Middlesex in London, and went on to the Royal College of Art. But actually I've been really open that my interest was around material, which really drove my sort of aesthetic. And I was really interested around particularly very functional and purposeful materials first. And what fascinated me is that if you wanted to buy, for example, a really beautiful wool or a breathable material, a waterproof material, often they were either really difficult to find, bearing in mind this was the early 2000s, or really expensive. And yet I was going out and finding an abundance of original jackets and things that had actually been made from those materials relatively affordably at the time. So I almost looked at it, I guess from quite a practical point of view, that, whoa, there's all this really cool stuff already out there. Do I really need to go out and buy new things all the time? And then I guess when you jump forward, sort of 5-6 years after I left the Royal College and my business was up and running, it was only then that the whole narrative around sustainability really started to kick in and then change a great deal. And really in the last decade, but I'd say even really within the last 5-6 years, everyone's sort of woken up to, whoa, okay, you know, what are we actually going to do about all of this? And it wasn't that long ago that really experienced journalists were saying to me, what do I think about the sustainability trend? It's like, whoa, this isn't a trend. This is about a fundamental shift that we need to make as an industry. And I guess as my business has developed, I've realised how important it is that within Raeburn, we push ourselves and we're a pathfinder, but we're also a collaborator with others, so that hopefully we can make positive change together. So yeah, that's sort of origins and the last 15 years or so in 2 minutes, hopefully.
100%. And I think what sets you apart is the way that sustainability had been embedded in your ethos from the start. And so what has been your experiencing navigating larger companies like Timberland?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that I've certainly found that when we've been working with larger companies, and we've been fortunate over the years to work with everyone from Clark's Footwear to the Victoria and Albert Museum and sportswear brands, they've come to us because of the way we work already and the ethos that we've developed. And we have a very clear way of working within Raeburn. And I mentioned already about the remade, but our ethos is all about what we call the 3 Rs. So remade, reduced or recycled. And if we're not doing 1, 2, or ideally all 3 of those things, we don't do it. And so it means when a big brand comes to us, we're very clear from the beginning, well, cool, okay, if you genuinely want to change, then great, we can do that together. But with Timberland as a sort of a very good example, I guess I realised quite early on that we shared a lot of values, importantly. It's sort of easy to forget that Timberland have a tree as their logo, right? And actually they're already doing a massive amount around sustainability. They're an sort of inspiration to me when I left the Royal College. Things like Earth Keepers, which at the time were really, really sort of progressive. But then the really cool thing is that as a small independent company and an independent designer, when you work with big brands, you really have that opportunity to make a difference on a global scale. And so with Timberland, we've been able to do things like innovate around regenerative agriculture, circularity as well. But all of a sudden, if you can change the dial a little bit for a big company like that, then whoa, it really does sort of move things forward a lot. So that's what I've been really excited about most recently.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think this conversation is about thinking about this idea of theories of change and what it actually takes to shift those dialogues. And what I've noticed in my experience is that small brands have the nimbleness or the agility to kind of make those shifts, whereas bigger brands are navigating corporate bureaucracy and things like that. So what has been your experience in terms of the best practices and actually instilling that change in a more corporate, larger brand? Yeah,
I think it's about having things that you can genuinely test, learn and scale. And we now have part of the collection within Timberland called Earth Keepers by Raeburn. And it really is the pathfinder for the company, and it allows us then to put all of the most innovative materials, methods of make into footwear or apparel that then we can put into the market pretty rapidly and actually see what the reaction is. And that's pretty cool. And I guess on the other extreme, the way that digital has accelerated and the opportunity to actually test things really quickly as well,
Right.
and how that can sort of manifest, I think is really, it's super exciting. But I think one of the things that I was told early on when I started with Tim, and I've really tried to do, is not to get sucked in too much, because it's so important that you do. On the one hand, you're respectful of that big brand, but you do think differently and you do push things forward. And I guess in the right way, you cause a few headaches, right? Because that's why you're there, because it's the only way that things are going to change. But to jump back to the earlier point, the real key with all of this is it has to be about a proper partnership, and it has to be about values, and it has to be about working with someone that genuinely wants to change. Otherwise, you're just there, as a surface thing, and maybe it's really not going to work. So I think that's really key in this.
100%. It's about bridging that gap between those that are engaging in that work of reimagination and have that vision with those that have the resources
Exactly,
and capacity.
Yeah. And the final thing I'd say is that the reason all of this is so important is that those big companies, the scales of economy and the scale of opportunity for change is massive. When all of the big sportswear brands started getting onto recycled material, as an example, and there are still issues, of course, around synthetics, but it meant when I first started my company, if I wanted to work with recycled materials, it was 50, 70% more expensive. Now you have parity in pricing, recycled versus a virgin cloth, sometimes even more affordable to buy a recycled material. And that's a real tangible thing, and it's because more and more people are doing it. And so if you then start to look at that with natural materials and everything else as well, then those are really good levers. And then importantly, linked with Alec and linked with the bigger conversation here, buying less, using less. Make no mistake, this isn't, we can do things in a more positive way, manufacture things and then all consume more. No. Let's try and make things in a better way, and let's consume a hell of a lot less. And then we've got a chance.
100%. I feel like we could have a whole conversation about degrowth in a whole nother panel.
Literally.
But Mica, now shifting to you, representation, I feel, has become of a buzzword in recent years. But I think it's really important to revisit the importance of it. So in your experience, as someone that has been looking at fashion through a lens of racial politics to size inclusion, what are the dangers of having an industry that doesn't truly embrace representation for all?
First of all, it's always dangerous not to be seen. If you're not seen, nobody will ever see you as who you are. You will have difficulty to make a career path, earn your money, your ambitions to outlive them. We also need to remember when you're not seen, the majority will always look at these people as the others. And when you are a part of the other, you will not fight, but struggle and fight and often survive to fit in. What we need to remember and really write back our ears is that we are not here to fit in. We are here to belong. And it's first when we belong and we represent an industry, a business, a job, a career, well, then we are seen, then it's not dangerous anymore. But not being seen is dangerous for all of us. And again, when we talk sustainability all over, when we talk climate sustainability, we also talk social sustainability. It's like a full circle. It's not just racial. It's not just injustice in size. It's also fast fashion. It's also how do the resources comes from. It's again when we look at people in the industry, who do we represent? Who are seen? Who are here? And it's rare still this day today to see a black woman sitting in a panel and talk about fashion in the industry. So I think one of the things that we need to understand in this industry, I've been here for since 2010, is that this is not an exclusive club of somebody. This is a place where all of us are included. So how we do that in the way that we want to, that's the question, and that's the big work. One of them is that we need to remember we need to be educated. We can't make this happen just like that, even though we might want to. This is about education. It's about reading the books that are written. It's about listening to the people who are not just in there, but really make the big changes with the people with the big resources. Again, we do not fit in. We include because we want to belong. And I think we need all of us to remember that, even in an industry like fashion.
100%. And I think it takes this idea of representation beyond just the visual representation, right? Who's on a billboard or a marketing campaign, but truly interrogating who is actually behind the label, the compensation around that, the social sustainability, as you mentioned. So if you think about it, I think fashion historically has really been rooted in this aspirational idea of exclusion, of white veneration in many ways, right? Or a certain body type. So I think our definitions of sustainability is rooted in challenging the whole paradigm of fashion.
Yeah.
And so I think we've touched on, the back end of from designing to the images and representation of fashion. So I want to talk a bit about the consumer end. Alec, you wrote a book recently.
I did write.
Can you share the title of this book?
It's called The World's on Fire, but We're Still Buying Shoes. Because we are.
And I love that title.
Yeah, I know. It still cracks me up sometimes. I just I went to a lot of sustainability conferences and panel talks and summits and all this kind of stuff, and it just felt like the elephant in the room, or that there was an elephant in the room of consumption, where you would have someone like Chris, who's an expert in like the way clothes are made. You would have supply chain experts. You would have people from the global south representing unions or representing workers' organizations. But there was never anybody in those kinds of spaces who would be able to really understand why we buy so many clothes. And you'd always hear off the cuff in a panel talk, like someone saying turns out that all of this is going to be essentially meaningless because clothing consumption is projected to like double in 10 years or something. And it just became clearer and clearer to me that was a really urgent question that we needed to ask as well. Yeah. And so that's basically why I wrote my book, because I'd spent most of my professional life telling people to buy things. And it's true. That's essentially what you do as a fashion editor, is you're really there to kind of make consumerism seem much more relatable and much more exciting. And so that's why I started to kind of go down that path and do my book.
100%. And I think the power of your book is that it talks about that emotional side of clothing, right? And it also talks about this frenzied hype culture, which you, as you say, were deeply in that world at one point. So from your perspective, what needs to change in terms of the way we're telling stories? And what have you seen about hype culture that truly creates this culture of mindless consumption?
Yeah, it's hype's just a really, really, really good way of selling things. I think it's kind of the natural end point to where society is right now, where we live so much of our lives through social media, where essentially hype is about like making quite ordinary things seem extremely exciting and seem like they have to be engaged with. You have hyped Netflix shows, you have hyped recipes, you have hyped musicians. There's hype everywhere, but specifically with fashion, it's just a really, really easy way of selling the same idea over and over again. And I think especially if you look at the luxury end of things, like all of the luxury collaborations we've been seeing recently, it's always the same idea. It's just repackaged. And the way that news cycle works these days and the way that media works these days is you always have to have something new every single day. And the idea of like a collaboration or something being limited edition or a drop, like that really easily plugs into that news cycle, because you can always have something new. You can always have, and especially when you remember that so many of these brands are at the end of the day owned by the same people, you can have one giant luxury conglomerate that's essentially in the news constantly because all of the different houses are in the news, you know, 1 week after the next. So yeah, hype's just a really, really amazing way of selling things. And the problem is that it just keeps people buying things because they're led to believe that they're so important. But then the problem is you buy it and then the next day there's something that's supposed to be even more important than the thing that you bought yesterday. And I think something we really need to understand as consumers is that we should be like owning the clothes that we buy rather than buying them and forgetting about them and getting rid of them.
Right, right. It almost goes into this idea of true materialism in the sense of truly valuing something, right? That longevity piece.
Did you watch that Netflix documentary?
Which one?
The one minimalists.
No, I haven't.
There's this really great American academic called Dr. Juliet Shaw, who in this documentary talks about the idea of true materialism, where it's like we're supposed to be actually considering the kind of material nature of the things that we buy rather than being like compulsive consumers.
100%. So within that, let's talk about the role of media, right? What do you think fundamentally needs to change about, say, the news cycle, the way journalists are writing and talking about fashion to kind of balance this world of, yes, there is creativity, there are designers that deserve to be platformed, but not having the storytelling rooted in consumption per se?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard because the thing with the fashion press is that it's so closely tied to the fashion brands itself that I can't imagine either brands or the media kind of voluntarily slowing down. I think it's something that we all need to start. I think it's a movement that needs to happen kind of culturally before we can really see it reflected in the kind of business world. And I think it's just up to like people like us sitting around here to just be a little more critical of the things that we buy and a bit more demanding, and to just wear stuff all the time. You know, if you get something you really love it, just wear it over and over again. For me, the thing that urgently needs to change about the media is there's just so much, you know, greenwashing in the 90s was basically about like big oil denying that climate change was happening.
Yeah.
And greenwashing now is about big oil and every other major industry in the world pretending that they're doing something to combat climate change when they're not. And what's really disturbing right now about the place the fashion press is in is that the fashion press is either, I don't know, willingly or unwillingly allowing itself to be exploited by that distraction narrative over and over again. So you will have like giant billionaire corporation X claims to be interested in regenerative agriculture. And so the fashion press talks about that. There's no numbers attached to it. There's no, they're not saying how much money they're willing to put on the table for regenerative agriculture. There's no numbers tied to what any of this means. There's no idea of what this would do to reduce the impact of these corporations' businesses right now. And there's no questioning on like what work they're doing to reduce the impact of their business now and tomorrow. And this sort of stuff happens all the time, and it basically means that like one of the really important stakeholders in the fashion industry is allowing itself to be part of the greenwashing kind of narrative. So that's the thing that really needs to change, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to like the importance of specificity within the storytelling around sustainability, because you're right, we're almost being gaslit by all of these, you know, major players in the game that are using the language of sustainability, the buzzwordification of sustainability, without concrete measures of true change. But you talk about degrowth from like the consumer base. So now I want to talk about what degrowth can look like from the brands, from the designers. So what have those conversations, if any, looked like internally at bigger players, or maybe in your own brand? Yeah,
I guess when I think specifically within Raeburn, the first thing to say is that our whole ethos it's not about giant growth anyway. You know, currently we do our remade in England items that were actually made in the UK, but I guess we're interested about how growth for us can be done in the right way. So when we think globally, we're still thinking locally. At the moment, we're doing remade in England. We're making things in England. But what does that look like remade in Seoul or remade in San Francisco, and working with local craftspeople there as well? And I guess that's a really key thing for us. personally. And then a massive part of what we do within Raeburn, you touch on longevity. I mean, all of our products have a lifetime guarantee. We'll repair anything that we've made before to try and keep it in circulation for as long as we can. I think they're really important levers. On the one hand, if you're making something properly to begin with, and you're actually saying to the customer, when they buy that thing from your shop or online, that's really where the journey begins, rather than thanks for the purchase, see you later. I think that's a really important sort of trigger in all of this as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I'm seeing a shift where the role of brands is also going beyond just that of a marketplace to also education hubs.
Massive, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting shift, right? How we viewed the role of brands in this.
Yeah.
So what do you think the face and, again, the role of brands is going to be going forward in this very critical juncture for people on the planet?
Yeah, it has to be about radical transparency in different ways. I think a lot of what we try to do is educate and inspire. When I put my Timberland hat back on and I do think about things like the regenerative side of what we've been working on, there are very credible figures actually, and there is a lot you can dig into online and things. So I think it's really important that whatever you do it as well as you can. You're transparent about it. You're honest if you make mistakes, and then you help each other to move forward. And I think that's really key. I think any of that old-fashioned model of fashion being smoke and mirrors and a hell of a lot of secrets, we need to forget that, because the only way we can really change things is by helping each other. And I have started to see that a lot more between big brands, and certainly the way that we've been able to work, but we need so much more of it.
100%.
You know?
Yeah, I've seen that as well. This idea of collaboration being at the core of it, open sourcing knowledge, but also it speaks to that whole paradigm shift again around education and thinking about things holistically. And I think that naturally makes me think about the idea of intersectionality, which I know is core to your work. And so do you want to speak a bit about your work with educating folks about intersectionality and what that has meant for you specifically in the context of fashion?
I think I know that I'm lucky sitting in the middle of these two gentlemen, because we're actually talking about it right now. We are talking about how to break down the barriers so we can walk into the next step of a new world of fashion. Everything changes. The fashion industry needs changes too, and we need to dare to make those changes. And it's very dangerous to be transparent for many people, and it's very dangerous to be outspoken in not putting all the words into nice packages, but be really honest and brutally honest. but we need that to break down those barriers. And one of the things, or many of the things in the work of intersectionality is just that. We break down barriers. We make sure we do not reproduce and or maintain oppression or injustice in what we are working or in the society we live in. We help each other. We are there for each other. We remember each other that we do make mistakes. and to know each other better as people, we are people in the fashion industry too, we need to be there. We need to be brutally honest. And do we need to be educated in that? Yes. We need to be brave in the way we work with each other. We need to be brave in front of each other and to break down the old-fashioned way to do it, because I remember those days too. They were not nice. And we still reproduce some of those things today. Unfortunately, the most powerful ways is the way that we reproduce and maintain. So the core knowledge in intersectionality and being a person in the industry, or all of us, I think, to shift the paradigm, you have to think intersectional. You have to practice intersectionality. If you don't, we will reproduce, we will maintain the old way and not moving on and shift the paradigm that we need and walk into doing. So in the work of intersectionality and the knowledge, again, we need to be educated. We need to educate and to think that we can do everything ourselves. It's if it was so easy, it would have changed, wouldn't it? And it's not. So learn from the best. Invite more people in, as we do. Have the big conversations. I think it's important for all of us, and especially the industry and the new people who wants to walk into the industry. They don't need the struggles as we did. They need an opportunity to make them grow and see the growth of an industry all of us love.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to sustainability, it's also about widening the perspectives that we've had in this conversation, not only because it's the politically correct thing to do, but because it quite literally expands the modalities through which sustainability can take place. Without that, I think we often reduce sustainability to just very quantitative measures like carbon emissions and things like that. But we know that at its core, sustainability is a complete reimagination of how we perceive consumption, the value of things, relating to each other in community. So in your work, consulting and educating brands, what has been, in your experience, the best ways in actually sparking that change within folks and institutions and brands?
The inspiration to do that? Or
Yeah, because I think, the core question of this conversation is theories of change, right? Is it going to take this massive awakening through shock value, or is it something more deeper and personal? I don't think there's one answer, so I'd love to hear
Tricky
what
one,
it,
eh?
exactly. It's a very existential
there's
conversation.
really not answer. It's just like, what are you asking about? Because this is wild. Please, Alex, take this one, because that's much.
I'm happy to chip in. So I completely agree. To use a slightly different link, in the UK, but I think globally, we have an amazing program called Blue Planet, and we have this legendary presenter, David Attenborough, right? Yeah. And David Attenborough, unfortunately, he's documented a disappearing world over 50 years. He's a living legend, national icon, and everything else. And there was a moment 5 or 6 years ago where they played the first series of Blue Planet, and it was all about, of course, the oceans globally. And it was the first time where David Attenborough charted what we're doing to the seas and the oceans. And David Attenborough looked down the lens and said, it's up to you to make the change. And even as I say it now, the hairs on my arms, it was this moment where a lot of people actually really woke up, because it was beamed into millions of homes from somebody that just everybody respected, right? We haven't had that moment at all in fashion. I don't know, with Rana Plaza accidents, all of these horrendous things that everyone knows about, but yet there hasn't been that wake-up call. And I don't know what it's going to be, whether it's actually going to be a lot of tiny things that come together.
How many clogged beaches?
Yeah, exactly. What do we need to see? Yeah, the Atacama, as you say, all of this different stuff. But my personal perspective is there isn't going to be one big change.
No, exactly.
There's going to be all of these little experiments that hopefully come together to make that big change. But I really struggle. But it's why I love that you use the word. We need to be braver, right? We need to push ourselves more, because it's really serious.
I think for me, honestly, the issue always comes back to greenwashing. In the it's so effective at stopping the conversation. And perfect example is I forget exactly what Timberland's regenerative agriculture commitment is, but it's a really big one, right?
Yeah.
So
massive.
So greenwashing is so pervasive that when Timberland comes out with a regenerative commitment and is willing to put numbers on the table and willing to actually be transparent about it, that's met with a similar amount of cynicism as an actual sleight of hand bluff move, which is I'm not going to name the brand because I don't want to get myself into trouble, but another regenerative, not even commitment, but some noise that was being made around a giant company and regenerative agriculture, is they're given the same amount of airtime. And what's really disturbing is that consumers either treat them both with optimism or with cynicism when they're completely different. Because on the one hand, you have a company that's genuinely willing to disclose numbers and say look, this is what we're going to try and do,
Right.
and whether we make it or not, we have to hope, but they're not misleading anybody. And then, but at the same time, the industry is very happy to be misled by other people, and I think that's a really, really disturbing. It basically means the entire credibility of the fashion industry is at stake, I think. And
I think we also, just to acknowledge, as you also said, it's within the last 5-6 years, this is still new for all of us, that it's now we're taking it serious. We've all been working with this for many years. Now we feel somebody is listening. And I don't remember if it was you, but we need to scale. I think the most impact comes in the materials of scaling. We need to scale the results. We need to be wise in this and be intelligent in the way we work. For once, creativity is just not creativity anymore. We need to be creative in our creativity to make it better for the people, not just for us, but for the consumer, for the people in the production, for the models, for everybody in the industry. So I think scaling the results of our work, I think that will be one of the big things to see and make the changes.
Yes.
And again, it's still new. 5-6 years. Yeah. We need way many years to work on this. We need to be positive. And again, we need to be brave. And we need to maybe reborn ourselves in all this. You know, so there's many things that we need to think about and act on.
100%.
I think for me it always comes down to power, right? Like,
yeah.
you know, it's really about who has power and who doesn't. And, you know, the funny thing is, it almost makes me optimistic in a way that, like, the same, you know, it's like the same system that's oppressing marginalized people. It's also the same system, like, destroying the planet. Like, it's literally like the same thing. It's about entrenched power and a complete kind of lack of democracy. And the way that we fix systemic racism is the same way we fix systemic plastic pollution or systemic carbon emissions, or, you know, all this stuff. It's only ever going to be people coming together and working together that's going to fix it.
100%, yeah. And I think it lands us at this conclusion of sustainability as an interrogation of power. And the fact that it is an iterative process. We're not going to have the answers overnight. And I think the best theories of change isn't something you could tie in a bow, but something you're approaching from every angle, from the consumer body to education to the designers. So thank you all so much for your work in challenging the space and reinventing this space. It's an honor to be in conversation with you all. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and be sure to tune into the rest of the talks for Copenhagen Fashion Week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.